Hey guys, this is question MM077 of the Maths Methods Sharpened Study Guide. We've got a question on the axes below, sketch the graph of f of x equals, and then we've got a hybrid function. So a hybrid function is simply two graphs, or two functions that are graphed on the same axis. So we've got y equals 2, and y equals negative x plus 1 squared plus 2, where for y equals 2 we've got a domain of negative 5 to negative 1. And then for the second one, we've got negative 1 to positive 1. So basically all we need to do here is simply draw both of these graphs in this domain, or in their own domains, on the same axis. So I'll draw my own little axis here. So let's start with the easiest graph to draw. So our y equals 2 is quite a straightforward graph to draw. And it's simply just a horizontal line. So we know that because if our graph is y equals 2, that means that the graph is simply a horizontal line through the point y equals 2. So let's make our point here 2. However, because of this domain here, negative 5 to negative 1, we can only draw this from negative 5 to negative 1. So let's call this negative 1 here, and then negative 5 is here. And we know that at negative 5 is a closed circle because this is including negative 5. And whenever we're including something, we are drawing a closed circle. At negative 1, we're not including it. However, at negative 1 here, we are including it. So let's just draw a closed circle because at negative 1, we are including that. And it's simply a straight line to negative 1. So to label this, we get negative 5, 2, and negative 1, 2. Easy. And that's it. So that's our first one done. And what we need to do now is draw our second hybrid function. So this is a quadratic, and we can see that this is in turning point form. So we've got y equals negative x plus 1 squared plus 2. And because this is in turning point form, we can actually see that our turning point is in fact at negative 1, 2, which happens to be the same point as this end value here. So we know that our turning point is negative 1, 2, and now we need to figure out what our x and y intercepts are. So let's start with our y-intercept. So we get our y-intercept when x equals 0, which means that our y-intercept is given by y equals negative 0 plus 1 squared plus 2, which means we have negative 1 plus 2, which is equal to 1. So our y-intercept is 0, 1, which occurs here. And now we just need to work out our x-intercept. So our x-intercept occurs when y equals 0, which means we get 0 equals negative x plus 1 squared plus 2. If we take 2 off both sides, we get negative 2 equals negative x plus 1 squared. These two negatives cancel out. And then if we square root both sides, we get x plus 1 is equal to plus minus the square root of 2. Minusing 1 from both sides, we get negative 1 plus minus root 2, which means that x equals negative 1 plus root 2, and x equals negative 1 take root 2. Now, because our domain for this second parabola is from negative 1 to 1, this x-intercept here is the only one that is included because root 2 is about 1.4, which means that negative 1 plus 1.4 is going to be equal to positive 0.4, which is inside this domain. However, negative 1 take away root 2 is not inside this domain. So we know that our x-intercept here is going to be negative 1 plus root 2. And so we've got our turning point, we've got our y-intercept, we've got our x-intercept. And now what we need to do is figure out our endpoint. So we know that our endpoint occurs at x equals 1, which means that it occurs at f of 1, which equals negative 1 plus 1 squared plus 2, which equals negative 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 squared is 4, so negative 4 plus 2. And then this is equal to negative 4 plus 2, which is negative 2. So our endpoint occurs at 1, negative 2. Fantastic, which means this occurs about here. And because this is not including 1, this is actually an open circle. So make sure you do an open circle here. And then we can simply connect the dots. So this is a parabola that goes down like this. And that was a little bit off, but you get the idea. This is 0, 1. This is root 2 minus 1, 0. And make sure that you label everything. So all of your endpoints, all of your intercepts, and this was 1, negative 2. So that's all we have to do. Just make sure when you're doing these kind of questions that you really pay attention to the domain, and also just make sure that you label everything, including the intercepts and the endpoints. But that's the final answer.